So here we're talking about language alter ego, indeed, about emotional social approaches, and we will have a look how we can use them practically. All right. So if you want to find me, look for me on LinkedIn, Ekaterina Matveeva. Well, you can drop me an email. You can find me on Instagram, whatever you prefer. We're here connected as sisters and brothers, teachers, linguists, practitioners, and well, theoretical researchers all together. So excited. Okay, so one of the first questions that you need to ask yourselves, like as teachers and also your students, does your personality change when you speak another language? And I think it's so important, crucial even at the start of an academic year. I know we are right now somewhere almost like in December. I know that, well, in Latin America, academic year starts well, second semester in Europe, same happens in Asia. So maybe, somebody will be asking in January, February, does your personality change when you speak another language? Or somebody will be asking second semester. So does your personality change or not? Right? And we're going quickly through a few important theoretical, I would say like statements. We've got with you Jung, Karolov, Sapir-Whorf, Yazbitska, Norton, and well, myself, humble self. Well, I had to, to insert myself there. Forgive me for all that. According to Jung, personality is this characteristic patterns of thoughts, feelings, behaviors that make a person unique, right? So our persona takes different forms based on our culture, upbringing, and general environment. And we can develop it even further when we look with you into cultural communication. And there was Yuri Karolov who talked about, he was the first one who talked about linguistic personality, but he was looking at it as a person expressed in a language through a language person, and then the main features and the basis of linguistic means. There were like three levels. You can have a look. It's very interesting, but I would say that after that, like after the theory, things evolved significantly. In any case, of course, we all know Sapir-Whorf, and you may be Whorfian or maybe not. But the idea is, of course, when people speak different languages, they actually have different views of the world. And well, Chomsky, if you love and admire Chomsky, Chomsky was saying, no, he was opposite, say, Sapir-Whorf. But at some point, I was trying to put them together. That's another story, maybe for another, conference and lecture, but it's possible to connect them too. Norton, if you ever looked at papers by Norton, Norton was saying that identity creates a sense of belonging. Well, we know this, but even more, imagined identities help achieve goals. So learners who imagine who they might be and who their communities might be when they learn and form. And I agree, like if let's say you're somewhere in Brazil, well, La Leticia, somewhere in Brazil, and your students learning English, you can tell them, okay, imagine who would you be in the future when you're going abroad to study somewhere, maybe in the United States or United Kingdom or Canada, Australia. What are you going to do? Are you going to play arts or are you going to be maybe in a football team? So what's going to happen there? And when kids start obviously dreaming, they start seeing themselves embodying that personality and identity in that language and culture. Loving it. And then Wisbitska, if you've never heard of Anna Wisbitska, go there and read her books on emotions. Loving it. Emotions across languages. She was talking about socialization and about there's very interesting emotional scripts. So what happened there, that socialization in new language, right? New culture may lead to changes in our verbal repertoires. Indeed, we start changing the way how we express ourselves, how we express our emotions in another language. Then we're adjusting our lexical semantic networks, also our concepts, yeah, conceptual memory, or let's say associative memory, and then, as I mentioned, emotional script to attune to the meanings in the new community. She's been studying, for instance, how Polish immigrants or Asian immigrants were adjusting in Australia because she is herself being Polish, like part of my family living in Australia. Fascinating stuff, loving it. And then what's been interesting in the past years, I would say in the past decades, the way how language, like or the view of the language has been shifting, that now it's seen as a side of personality construction, right? And it's so important because in the past, language was treated as, say, cognitive, right, to function. But now it's side of personality construction, right? And so language learners' personalities are not fixed. And if you haven't been really familiar with this particular context, like concept and context, definitely have a look, because when we learn new languages, well, something happens, and then the personalities start moving. Right. Um, this is one of my definitions that I came up with 2022, and ever since there've been quite a few definitions depending on what I'm talking about. So language alter ego is a voluntarily and involuntarily created linguistic personality based on a newly generated behavior appropriate for particular sociocultural environment. In other words, that something shifts in us when we start speaking in a new language, a new culture, and we get immersed, not just cognitively, but also psychologically, emotionally, verbally, non-verbally, well, semiotically, in many other ways. And what's interesting that when you are in the classroom with your students, you can observe what happens when your students, let's say, reach a level of B1, B2. I've been running studies, and I can tell you that, let's say, the inception of the language alter ego begins somewhere, of course, in A1, A2, but then it starts manifesting, obviously, when your students are, well, capable of communicating at much more verbose level. So at B1, B2, you may start seeing subtle changes in behavior, right? So something happens. Yeah, like keep an eye on small shifts. Maybe well, somebody uses more hands speaking in Italian, in Spanish, or if it's English and it's more British English, so then it's reserved. Or perhaps, there is different emotional engagement. Again, Brazilian speaking students suddenly shift their emotions because, well, we know we enjoy emotions in Brazil, but in the UK it would be slightly different. Then, of course, there's social flexibility. We notice how students interact with each other, especially if we set up situations when they interact in the target language, right? So something is shifting, especially if there is an opportunity to go on, well, summer trips, study trips, where students can get immersed in new cultures. I was lucky when I was, well, when I was little, like my international, like intercultural family had me kind of, passing by across relatives in different countries. And also when I was at school and high school, I had different scholarships where I could go and live with host families. And I'm saying that I was lucky because I started noticing these subtle changes, in routine, in rituals, like mornings, how people would wake up and have their breakfast across different countries and cultures. So when you have this opportunity to write, well, these differences to your students, like comparing, let's say, the local culture and the target culture, they will benefit immensely, especially if all of this is happening in the target language. All right. So how else, we can help nurture language alter ego? We need to create cultural moments. And I know a lot of you already create everything, whether it's playing music, celebrating a holiday, or perhaps as well doing something more about, let's say, well, cuisine, right? Or maybe it's about particular traditions. Christmas is coming, so in the US, Thanksgiving just passed, So we are trying not just learn, we try to feel and live the culture and the language. And the ultimate goal is not about speaking perfectly well at C1, C2 level. It's about living in that language. It's about feeling in that language, making new concepts in this language, decisions, expressing ourselves, right? Of course, role play, like it's real life. What I've noticed, I've had a chance to, I've been teaching at my company, so at my school, I'm a lingua and lingua plus, but I've been also teaching from time to time, different places like universities. And I also had a chance like to teach at a Chinese school like years ago. We were coming up with a project for summer camp, and I could observe what was happening there. And I can tell you that, of course, in official settings, like school walls, it's very difficult to kind of snap and switch to real world. We need to be able to relax and set up situations that would happen maybe between friends, yeah, or at home, somewhere, or like at the market, or maybe, well, admissions to university, where students can really play. So a bit of theater, like as I said, like I've just come in yeah, after a theater performance. So to play a bit of theater with your students. I understand that there is a curriculum, and typically the curriculum is imposed by the state. I get it. But you can always introduce maybe just 5 minutes of role play, 5 minutes of theater, and see how your students can embody themselves in new language. And of course, about names and all, we can talk about it later if we have time, for questions. Okay, so about reflection and sharing, I think it's so important to encourage your students um, feel and analyze how they feel in the target language. So it's not just about, oh, I feel happy or I feel motivated learning this target language. No, it's a lot about their inner world, what's happening to them, especially if they're a teenager. There are a lot of complex emotions. They may just like shut down, like or close up. Um, try to play with emotional wheels, like wheels of emotion. These wheels of emotions were created in the Western culture in English. So if you're teaching English, and a lot of our teachers here teaching only English, so you can play with those wheels of emotion, saying, okay, can you try determine which emotion you're feeling right now? Can you call it in English? Can you, well, name it in your native language and then in English? It's very interesting exercise. I had this in Hollywood, like in the springtime. I was studying cinematography. It's another story. And I was actually working with some of Japanese and Brazilian students alongside, where we were doing exercises where we had to name emotions really fast, like just looking at the face of a person. Oh, disgust, right? Or oh, so on. And what I noticed that, for instance, Japanese students were struggling so much with naming emotions fast in English because it wasn't their native language. And what was happening as they were describing, emotions were coming to them in Japanese, right? So what we had to do, we had to take these wheels of emotions, have all these definitions of emotions written down. But then they said, you know what? I don't have any emotional connection to those definitions. They are just words on paper. So what we started doing, we started experiencing those emotions so that they could connect with those emotions. We started with general ones, just joy, sadness, anger, but then we went to all these tones and shades. And that helped a lot because their nervous system could connect to their linguistic system in the target language in order to create new associations. I understand that it can be quite tricky, but I'm here for bringing emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence, and linguistic intelligence together into your classroom. And probably, if you have some time, introduce it if you can to your students. Okay, so yeah, so it's all about the emotional journey. As I mentioned, I would also say encourage storytelling, anecdotes, anything that could help to build emotional vocabulary. This is just, again, about the connection to the language. And of course, it's a lot about celebration. Yeah, we need to embrace this new language. We need to embrace a new personality and identity. And it's not just about, let's say, losing their native personality, and it's about expanding that, because we all have this self that's in the center, and then we have all different like prisms. And those prisms are our personalities. And through these prisms, we can see the world and we can express ourselves, yeah, by the means of language and culture. In this case, we're just switching a pair of glasses and we're saying, all right, here, this is Spanish self, or this is English self, or this is French self, and so on. So celebration is always good. Okay, so here we have my model. You can take screenshots if you'd like. It took me 15 years to come up with this model. I actually managed to finally put it all together last year in 2024. And I don't plan to expand it, at least now for now. This model has 14 blocks. We won't talk about all the blocks today, but the idea is to create a journey, right? To observe a path of personality construction in a new language and new culture. And obviously, we have different components here. I call them blocks, but also we can call them dimensions. And what we are doing here, we are now jumping to a few of those blocks and have a look what we can do in our classroom in order to foster the development of some of those blocks. I won't go right now into, say, well, development of each block on each level of several, like A1, A2, B1, B2, and so on, but I've been also working on that. Okay, so with cognitive block, it's pretty simple, right? We've got with you vocabulary mapping, yeah, grammar puzzles, think aloud protocols. I'm pretty sure a lot of you been playing around with those tools, right? So there's so many different games, and I love when we have gamification. Like cognitive, easy, I would say. Of course, verbal communicative, again, we're talking with you about encouraging students to speak as much as they can. And one of the approaches, as you know, is a communicative approach. So we need to encourage your role plays. Already I talked about it. Speed dates and conversations, really cool stuff. So we can rotate students coming up with questions saying, okay, let's practice spontaneous dialogue. Okay, let's go. Speaking, listening skills here, flourishing. Journal prompts. I suggest if you can play with your students, say, hey, how about you are going to write, well, reflective notes, or let's say, let's play with creative writing. And what I love about it, you can dedicate just like 5 minutes at the start of classroom or at the end and say, just write as much as you want. Don't think, just write in your target language and see what comes up. And I think this could be a really good task. And if you want to go a little bit further, and this is like, creative, it's about well, creativity, right? You can ask them, for those who want, to write in the target language in the morning and in the evening. But you won't be able to control them because it depends on their own wish if they want to practice. But again, from my own practice with all my languages, and well, I'm polyglot, I speak multiple languages, it helped me a lot just to connect again with emotions and well, vocabulary. Right, nonverbal communication. I know that nonverbal communication can be quite challenging when you're teaching language in the classroom, especially if you yourself as a teacher haven't been exposed a lot to the target language. Let's say that you haven't had a chance to live in the culture and actually live in the community, like a local native community. Why? Because you need to learn to mimic gestures, body language of the target culture, and even more facial expressions. The thing is, well, according to new studies, we even have with you emotional dialects, like accents and dialects in emotions that are expressed in our faces. You can have a look at the studies by David Matsumoto, one of my wonderful mentors. And in order to help our students, what we could do, of course, if we manage to mimic some of the gestures, then we can show them, of course, those gestures. If we don't know, that's fine. We can show videos, we can show images from all these cultures and ask students, well, first connect meanings, and then second, of course, to mimic, yeah, to play. Mirror exercises, yeah, so practicing communication with their body language and then silent role play. And I think it's fantastic, especially if you have exchange programs with your schools or universities. You can take both a group from a target language and your group of students, put them together and say, hey guys, observe your nonverbal communication, and then try to, well, mimic each other, mirror each other. Okay, cool. So what's important then when we are moving from let's say, verbal, nonverbal communication, of course, culture. And being bilingual doesn't mean that you're bicultural. And I'm always, well, advocating for obviously cultural studies. And here we have with you culture days and cultural journals, also pen pals. You can encourage your students to find peers, yeah, in the target language. And I remember even well, I think it was like 17, 19 years ago. I had my own virtual pen pals. Of course, you need to check which websites are good for that because, well, we don't want our kids to, find some weird people out there predators and all. So be careful with that, but it's possible. And I think it's exciting when they start communicating. Or maybe you just tell them, okay, how about you start writing messages or emails to each other, like in the classroom, maybe, best friends. Same about cultural journals. Maybe, it could be group projects when they work on the let's say observations about certain holidays, certain traditions or rituals. So there could be so many interesting ways how you can involve your students into the activities, especially again talking about teenagers who have suddenly lots of different interests. You can attract them whether it's food, whether it's music, right? Whether it's movies, theater, and so much more. But of course, then what we start noticing that learners not only cross the borders between two cultures, but they also reposition themselves, right? So they modify their personalities without having to completely lose their core self, right? So the core self is always there, and then we have native personality, target personality, and maybe other personalities, and if there are more languages and cultures involved. Okay, and here we come to emotions. I already shared with you a couple of examples. So we've got with you here as well emotional charades. Yeah, really good one. Yeah, to play around, pantomime. And then, of course, storytelling, mood boards. And one of the talks today was about this, yeah, as well, like a bit of, well, introduction to mood boards. And I think it's so important to learn how to connect, yeah, how to express what we feel inside, how to describe it, and then how to interpret what your interlocutor is trying to convey with emotions in your target language. And of course, after emotions, we have with you psychological. And you may say, like, why emotional and then psychological conscious? And there's also psychological and conscious block. Well, because I think emotional of the target languages, the more complex it gets. So with psychological block or dimension, what we start doing, we start playing around with identity, not only personality, but also identity, right? And we start having reflective discussions. I would say if your students are somewhere around B2 level, that's where you start introducing it. What you've seen just before, up to B1 level is totally fine, and you can go higher, like from A1, A2, and up to C1. But this one is better, starts in B2. You can try B1, but I would say it's much more complex with reflective discussions. Like identity collage, I think is really cool because even um, children at kindergartens and primary schools create those collages, or they paint or draw the images, especially if they're bilingual, trilingual kids, and they demonstrate which parts of their bodies represent certain languages and cultures, right? I think it's cool. Like you can play so much with that, and with reflective discussions, I think it's so important to demonstrate to students that it's absolutely fine to feel differently across their languages, to feel maybe more awkward or less courageous in one of their languages, or to feel maybe just different. It's okay, because this is this delicate process where they need to learn how to, how to embody their new self in a new language and culture. And of course, yeah, about journals, yeah, documents. And I would say for teenagers, it could be quite interesting if they'd like it to document how they feel in the target language. And then, of course, we know that when we talk with you about psychological part, we also start jumping into, well, social part, because language learning occurs through social context, and each individual's interaction with the world where it is necessary to fit in a social group. That's so important. It's like Vygotsky. And with social law, of course, we talk about, well, social norms. And also, we talk about different group projects and role play etiquette scenarios. I think it's all about how we fit in the world that we are preparing to enter, right? So when we talk about social norms, we know that if we come from, let's say, quite open-minded, energetic culture to quite reserved culture, we may have some friction there. They may look at us as freaks, and we don't want that. We need to learn social norms and practices from the target culture. And one of the ways, indeed, is to play social norms bingo, right? And students can gain role play, or they can just learn it first in theory and then try to practice it maybe in the moment when they enter your classroom, they suddenly find themselves in the United States or in the United Kingdom or wherever you want. Or maybe you just change every day in order to show the difference between US, UK, Australia, and Canada. Why not? Or like global English. Because group projects playing again around about social interaction, teamwork, and culturally appropriate way. And the etiquette, so important, still exists. We still need to know not just how to greet each other and how to say goodbye in the target language, but also how to react with sounds, right? When there is an element of surprise or when there is an element of grief, how to say condolences. So much more, because what may be considered okay in the local culture will be completely rude in the target language. Remember emotional scripts and all this, what Yuzbiska was saying? Yeah, so that's about it. Of course, then we get with you, there's kind of situation where language learners need to become fully aware of the different cultural and social aspects that influence language learning. Yeah, they need to invest not just purely cognitive skills, but also reposition themselves, like their linguistic personalities, in relation to the speakers of the target language. And you may say, but this is like so much work. You know what? I think this is a way how we can create more creative, more cohesive societies. And if a person speaks two and more languages, remember, bilingual doesn't mean being bicultural. So if a person speaks two and more languages, this person also needs to understand those cultures and know how to fit in and how to shift. And I know that it can be very challenging for teachers, and I don't want to load even more burden on your shoulders because I know you're doing a lot. I just encourage you to be curious, to be open-minded, and tap into those corners that you maybe haven't discovered yet, right? You haven't explored yet. And we go a little bit further here. We also jump into historic narrative block. And with a historic one, I think it's quite easy for you because obviously we talk about historic events, right? And story time, any kind of myth and folk tales, yeah, historical narratives, and of course, even cultural heritage interviews. There's so much that you can do, how you can explore that particular dimension. I love it because it's applicable to any classroom. Maybe you're talking about now the upcoming holiday, right? So Christmas. Or hey, ask your students to talk to no, well, either pen pals or maybe representatives of the target culture, so they would share some funny stories about Christmas, but from their perspective. There's so many different ways, or maybe how Christmas was celebrated 100 years ago. And then I would say that this is definitely for teenagers to explore a spiritual block. Um, Mathieu Ricard, one of, well, he's a French scientist and also he's one of Tibetan monks, shared how he's been introducing mindfulness practices, meditation to school. And if you have an opportunity actually to introduce a bit of this into your classroom, that's amazing. But it's not just about, oh, let's meditate in English. No. Have a look what kind of spiritual practices are there in their target language. What kind of beliefs exist in the target language, in the target culture, and take it from there. Simple exploration. I'm not putting here the part of semiotics. There is a block on semiotics, like symbolism, Lotman. I'm not doing it here, but it's also super interesting, especially for adults. But like with kids, different story. So You can always introduce different symbols. It doesn't mean that we're talking about like religion per se. You can, if you feel like maybe your school is Catholic school, why not? And I think it's important to compare how religion, how faith, symbolism, faith is perceived in your culture, in your language, and how it's perceived and talked about in the target language, target culture, right? And there could be, yeah, different stories, and you can compare. And remember that spirituality is all about values. And when you go to values, then you can compare the priorities of values in the local culture and in the target culture. And you can see the differences and similarities. And when you look at the similarities, you may say, hey, with that culture, we are very similar because this, and that. However, mind the differences and know how not to be rude about these differences. Great. Well, self-perception block is so important. We've discussed with you journals or like journaling, reflective discussions. So they're all leading to here and self-perception. There's also, yeah, perception of the world, but self-perception, it's all about how our students are feeling in the target language and in their, obviously, their native language. And you can boost their confidence. Of course, you can facilitate multiple activities in the target language. You can run self-assessment. I've been developing for Language Alter Ego different self-assessment tools for teachers and for students. And I think it's so important to assess progress because we don't feel it, right? So when this happens, like with language learning, unless we have yet tests, just, grammar tests, vocabulary. Oh, how many words do we know? Now, it's more about gradual development of different blocks and dimensions and development of this, um, well, concept and personality. And of course, yeah, mirror dialogues, encouraging students to practice dialogues in front of a mirror. I think it's great. It's also kind of theater practice. And I think this will help them to shift their perception when they see themselves speaking in the target language, well, in English and their native language. Probably their facial expressions will be changing. Somebody will be smiling more or less. Somebody will be more serious, less serious. And it's great when they start noticing. And well, language alter ego can manifest itself in set of behaviors, reactions, emotions, processing of certain events, memories occurring in target language within a foreign cultural context. And I think that when we build a language alter ego, uh, we need to remember that it happens when person acquires, becomes more fluent in new language and begins to adopt their language's cultural norms and communication styles. And all of this can start happening in your classroom, and you don't have to think, oh my God, how can I help the student with the pronunciation? As soon as the student starts embracing a new personality, a new language and culture, the brain will be, well, adjusting neuroscience, and pronunciation will go much more like smoothly. And also, I think there will be less problems, yeah, with certain sounds. Anyways, we're stopping here. We still have time for questions. I know I've been speaking quite fast and you will receive the presentation. I wanted to share all of this with you and also answer some questions. You can find, well, Ian on Instagram, Twitter, also LinkedIn and YouTube. And I'm happy now to have a look if there are any questions. Thank you.